Hi, this is Mike Landers with L7 Marketing Solutions, and I'm here today to interview Mike Cohen, elder care attorney, in regards to questions concerning paying for nursing home care and options everyone should consider. Mike, thanks for taking the time to meet with us today.
Well, it's a pleasure.
Mike, one of the first questions that everybody asks is, what's the average cost for a nursing home care in Texas?
Well, the state has said that the average cost is about $4,000 a month. But in the Dallas area, it's actually more expensive. If you go to Dallas or Houston, it's going to be more expensive than the state average. The reason why I say that, you go to some places, let's say in a small town, it's going to be a lot less expensive than in Dallas. But the state, for Medicaid purposes, they have a divisor that they look at the average cost of the state. They've said it's $130.88 a day, so that's equivalent to about $4,000 a month.
Do you recommend that everyone should at least consider long-term care insurance as regards to paying for nursing home care?
Well, if you're a multimillionaire and you're not concerned about the cost of care, or if you're really poor, then or if you don't pass underwriting, then those situations you would not consider long-term care insurance.
Are there any advantages to qualifying for the new state long-term care partnership plan that's coming out?
Yeah, I think there are, because you could have what the long-term, I guess what you should say is what that program is. And there is the states encourage people to have long-term care insurance. They'll give you what they call a dollar for dollar disregard. So in other words, if you have $200,000 of long-term care insurance, then if you utilize that long-term care insurance under the partnership program, they will let you keep $200,000. In other words, without getting eligible for Medicaid. So in other words, if you normally could only have $2,000, you might be able to protect $200,000 if you utilize that program. So it is an encouragement to get long-term care, and the state doesn't want to pay for the cost of care, so they're encouraging you to do that. So yes, there is an advantage. And you could have like a 1-year program or 2-year cost of care, and if that's, if you used up your long-term care insurance, then you could get on Medicaid.
If a person couldn't qualify for long-term care insurance, Mike, what should they do then as far as planning?
Well, there's lots of different options, and it just depends on the situation. Obviously, a lot of people, as we've talked about before, Medicare doesn't pay for the very much cost of long-term care. So you either have options of private pay. There are options of different insurance products if you cannot get long-term care. If you have a lot of assets, there are different types of, often people use certain type of annuities. There's Medicaid, which often we can protect hundreds of thousands of dollars and still get eligible for Medicaid, especially if they're married. If there's veterans benefits, so if that person or their spouse was a military veteran that served during wartime or is honorably discharged, then often we could get veterans benefits. Those are the most common ways of paying for the cost of care.
When do you advise families to start planning for possible long-term care issues? And I'm speaking in regards to pre-planning, if they can avoid doing crisis planning.
Well, if they don't have long-term care insurance, then it's a good thing to start looking into if they don't have the issues that we talked about before. If they meet that average person, middle class person, or can afford long-term care insurance, they ought to consider it. I was talking to a long-term care insurance person last week at this expo that I was speaking at. I usually tell people the prime time age is between 55 and 60 to buy long-term care insurance, because you're old enough that you probably put a lot of kids through college or whatever, and yet you're young enough where the premiums aren't too expensive. A lot of times, of course, there's always the risk that things could happen earlier. So a lot of times people say, well, people get MS or whatever at a younger age, and you never know when something bad's going to happen. So some people recommend even in their 40s, but personally I would say in their 50s would be prime time. It goes up each year. They sell long-term care insurance up to about age 85, but obviously the older you are, the more expensive that would be.
Sure. Mike, if someone is in a nursing home and they have long-term care insurance and it runs out as far as paying benefits, what options do they have then?
Well, either Medicaid or veterans benefits are the things that ought to be considered. In fact, sometimes we get people even with long-term care insurance and have both long-term care insurance and Medicaid. So sometimes we'll just assign the long-term care policy to the nursing home. So for example, I had one this week that they had $70 a day of long-term care coverage. So that's $2,100 a month, but the cost of the nursing home was $5,000 a month. They may have only had another $1,000 of income. They didn't want to pay that couple $1,000 of difference. So we did both Medicaid and used the long-term care policy.
You know, Mike, you mentioned veterans, and that brings up the question, if a veteran is in a nursing home, can they receive both VA benefits and Medicaid together?
Not only can they, but now, as of this month, the nursing homes, the state is actually pretty much, and it's always been the rule, but they just hadn't really followed through on this, but really the state is wanting people to apply for veterans benefits first to see what veterans will pay for prior to Medicaid. They were pretty lax on this in the past, but now they really want to see how much veterans will pay first. And so yes, they should, not only can they, but they are going to be required to probably apply in most cases.
You know, a lot of people, Mike, think that Medicaid is kind of like the last alternative for paying for nursing home care, but it really isn't.
No, you know what? A lot of people, as we said, there's a misconception that you have to have limited means to have eligibility for Medicaid. And in a married couple situation, we could often protect hundreds of thousands of dollars and still get Medicaid. I'm not saying that people shouldn't consider long-term care insurance, but if they don't have it or can't get it, then there are these other options, and most people don't realize about the availability and what the rules that Congress has stated, so that they can take advantage of it. It's no different than tax laws. You know, if you want to say for a child's education, or if you want to provide you could have a 529 to provide for that child or grandchild's education. Similarly, there are certain laws that Congress has stated and that Texas has that encourages people, actually, in some respects, to get public benefits.
You know, that brings up the last question. If somebody has the funds to pay for nursing home care, what other planning do you at least recommend that they should consider in case those funds should run out, or maybe they don't run out, but there's other estate planning tools they need to consider?
Well, you know, typically, let's say that they have some assets. A lot of times, and if they don't have long-term care insurance, you know, a lot of times people have an I love you will, everything to my spouse and then to my children, or they have a living trust. But those things may not be the best scenarios for asset protection. A lot of times we could do the same type of disposition pattern, but yet preserve assets. So in other words, instead of having an I love you will, you have a certain type of trust in the will that will preserve the assets for the ill spouse, and then for the children after that, the government encourages it if you use it for things that Medicaid doesn't cover, for example. It's different for veterans benefits, different type of planning. So it just depends on the type of, you have to look at each individual situation and say what fits for this person, and it's not a cookie cutter situation.
Mike, I know there are a lot of veterans out there that could really use benefits as far as aid and attendance for paying for nursing home care. Why do you think there's not a lot of information about aid and attendance out there?
Well, you know, I wish I could tell you the answer. It's just kind of like anything in life. It's those people who try to seek knowledge will find out more than they probably had any clue that there was out there. You know, I don't think that the government's purposely trying to say we don't want to tell you about these things. I just think that people just don't know about it. Most people don't know that a widow of a veteran may be entitled to benefits, and that's a great, you know, especially I see a lot of these people who are World War II veterans, or maybe even Korea, but that they're a surviving spouse, and they have no idea that they would be entitled to veterans benefits, especially if they go assisted living, or even if they stay at home and their medical expenses exceeded their income, that they too would be entitled to veterans benefits. I wish I knew why they didn't know about it, but I can't tell you why. All I know is that most people don't know.
Mike, I appreciate your information. You've really given us a lot of options as far as on dealing with nursing home cost. Can you give us any final thoughts on why it's important to plan ahead?
Well, I think like anything, people who are planning, remember, it's like the old Boy Scout, be prepared. motto, the old Boy Scout motto. I think that there's some truth to that. I mean, if you can prepare, then the bottom line is you could save a lot of assets. And you know, you worked all your life to save what you can, and so if we could serve that for either for that person or for their spouse or for their children, then I think most people would prefer saving their assets that they've worked so hard to accumulate.
Mike, I thank you for your time today, and anybody that would like to get a hold of Mike, all they need to do is go to DallasElderLawLawyer.com, and they can contact Mike, and we appreciate taking this opportunity to visit with you, and we look forward to doing other interviews in the future. Thanks, Mike.
My pleasure.